Values are guiding principles that we decide to live our life through. Being able to get clear on what those values are, how they show up in your life, and how it may impact decision making is a really, really crucial part of feeling like you're actually in alignment with who you really are and having a strong sense of self. So I want to really tackle this today. Mandy and I are here in Bali. It's very rare that we're both in the same room because we live in different parts of the country, and this is usually all online. So it's going to be a special episode, both getting sort of more of like us in real life actually talking together, but being able to really show you what we're going to be talking through with our clients. We're over here in Bali for a retreat. We're over here with some members from all across New Zealand, Australia, and alongside the workouts, the yoga sessions, the activities, and just being able to break bread together, there will be some really important workshop sessions here to really tackle how do we want to live, where are those areas that we want to refine certain habits or really improve our mindset and ultimately connection with others in a similar boat. So values is a big part of that chat, right? Being able to talk through why do we do the things we do and how we either reinforcing or conflicting with those thoughts is a really, really big one. Now, we've had various versions of this discussion in our pods, which are our small group trainings, many of you will know, that we do on a super regular basis, or at least monthly, where we have these chats with our members that have been with us, and it's never the nuts and bolts of nutrition training. It's like, how do we think about the things we do so that we reinforce doing them more often? Because if we truly want to be healthy until we're 80 plus, values is going to kind of come into it. And I think certainly for Aussies and Kiwis, we're in a spot where values is a discussion that can get warm and fluffy and not very helpful very quickly. But when you look at it through that lens like we defined of guiding principles to how we live our life, it becomes super valuable, but kind of hard to put your finger on, right? So walk me through that discussion you had recently with your pod, where values came through and why we're chatting about it.
Yeah, it was actually a really good conversation with... It was super interesting because I felt like we have talked about it a lot, but when I brought it up on the pod, it was completely brand new to some people. Just like sharing a list of values and being like, which of the top three here do you identify with most? And then asking, how in the last month, for example, have you kind of lived into these and what can you do differently? And it was a super productive discussion because I think it allows people to think of not just kind of like one rule after another, or not just one action after another, or one goal after another, but actually, why am I doing this and what does it actually mean to me in my life? And a lot of there's a lot of commonality with values. There's things like family, or there's connection, or there's various different things that might show up. But there's nuance to it and how that actually plays out for people. And I think one thing that showed up as well is that often with our value, we can almost, it's like two sides of a coin. You can live into a positive aspect of it where, take family, for example, family being one of your guiding values, that can be a good thing, but it can also go wrong too, where you sacrifice yourself to the family and you lose yourself as a result, or you lose your health as a result of that sacrifice, which is pretty common, I think, for women in particular. But actually understanding like the longevity or the longer term nature of values is, this is something that I want to live my life by, therefore I need to make sure that it is actually something that is benefiting me in a certain way, and it just is this really nice filter for everyday action. So it was a very cool discussion actually, and I'm excited to get into it with the members at the retreat as like a starting point of just actually getting them to reflect on this right from the get-go, right at the start of the week. What are the values that you're living into, and what do you actually want to see? And then we've got a bit of a special place to take that at the end of the week, but yeah, it's going to be good.
Exciting little structure. It's going to be fun because, sort of looking forward and then also structuring with looking back. I'm not going to spill the beans on everything, but being able, this podcast will probably come out as we're completing the retreat.
Yeah.
But that ability, and I think mums as much as fathers around that space of providing for others and absolutely having a reward of that process and having that feedback loop with this little being that you've created is always going to create a really strong desire to provide and protect and look after. But I think that's where that shift from priority to priorities becomes really conflicting, right? Because you can have a value of family that comes through as a really strong one on your list, and then you go priorities and you say health, and you're like, but now I have to move away. I need to, leave my family for 30 minutes to go work out, and that feels conflicting to the first value, right? So the first part of values is, okay, well, what are they? And let's just look at those as two, right? Family and health. And those are ones that versions of that are going to come up for pretty much every one of our clients. And those are the ones that may conflict the most, right? And if you go, family, health and then progress or growth through your career endeavors, like, well, how many conflicts do you want to create in 3, right?
Yeah.
So being able to kind of have that discussion of like, okay, so let's tackle the family one, right? Around, let's not even use value as one of your main drivers. Your family is that main value, but look at how you would make your decisions for your family by improving your health. And it starts to become that sort of second order consequence, right? Which is not, am I taking time away from my family to go to the gym? It's like, well, would you rather feel tired and sluggish and sit on the couch with your family, or would you rather use that time, go to a workout, come back and be more energetic, more present, and here's the kicker, give yourself more time with them on the other end of your life?
Yeah.
You start to look at it through that second order consequence, and you realize that it's no longer in conflict of both of those. You're just looking at it over a longer time horizon, right?
Yes.
And you and I talking in person for the last 24 hours, we've brought that up so many different times, right?
Yeah.
Between what's good for me now in the next 20 minutes versus what's good for me in the next 2 days or week or year is always going to change how conflicting that truly is. And I think just getting rid of that monkey mind aspect is going to be pretty big.
I think that's actually one of the true values of values is that they are by nature very long term because I think there can be some shift in your values over your lifetime, or maybe just some refinement of understanding more what those are for you. But as a general rule, the values that you have are going to be values that you're going to hold on to, and therefore you kind of it extends the timeline a lot, because it's not just what is my decision right now based on what is quote unquote good or bad. It's how does this actually map into this matrix that I've created for myself of these things that are important to me. And so it does, like, it allows you to kind of think through those second, third order consequences and actually just extend it out a little bit, it's super valuable, especially when you're first building habits, I think, and you kind of in that place of there's so many things I could do and I'm so overwhelmed and I'm a bit distracted and I don't know where to start. It's actually just take your foot off the pedal for a minute and map this out over a longer amount of time and think what is going to be, and exactly that, like you said, like what's good right now versus what's going to be good for me, tomorrow or the next day or the day after. It takes the pressure off your decision making a little bit, I think.
Totally. Yeah. And I think, working with so many high functioning humans that do have multiple goals and areas of progress that they're working on, I think being able to remind themselves that those aren't in conflict with each other, but rather the fact that they are driven or they are progressing in some area is the reason that they have a higher standard for their health, which is a reason for this level of congruency or warmth within the family, because they have a level of respect between each other, kind of all developing in certain ways. So they all have that trickle effect into each one of their values. And I think just being able to look at that and find ways to, as you said, look over a longer time horizon can be helpful. But also just talking about it on a regular basis, because as you said, if it's not talked about regularly, and I think we've typically been unsure how to talk about, right? We talked about self-sabotage through the same lens. Values, I think, is the same, as we know both of these are really important. We've heard these come through in many ways, but how do we talk in a way that is actionable, is valuable, that can be brought up in a way that changes your behavior, right? Because if it's just nice to talk about, our views on that, it's being able to make sure it can help. And I think, I'm just going to keep coming back to that definition, like how does it actually change how you live that life?
Yeah.
So let's talk through a personal example, because one of these I think we unpacked quite a lot actually on a podcast or just before a podcast. And you've come from both of us have come from super interesting areas of the health coaching area, or just health industry, where you came from a lot more of a clinical side, nuts and bolts, let's nerd out and everything, sort of biological. And then I did my own nerding out in a very different way, but it was coming from more that physical lens. And we both kind of met in the middle, really, between like understanding the massive multifaceted nature of everything we do. And I think probably a big reason that many people will listen to the podcast. Hopefully they do, otherwise it's just you and I talking. But last time I checked, there's a fair few people watching, that we're able to, I guess, appreciate each other's disciplines in regards to where we've come from, but we've kind of met in the middle, realizing that nuts and bolts nutrition and training don't help unless that person wants to be a better version of themselves, and they can do it on a regular basis, right? Where was I going there? So for you, the area that you were working on was, I can tell everyone that these are the areas of their health that they need to improve. I can even look at their blood work and saying, this is exactly what you need to do. But then taking all that information and making sure that person actually does it is the difference between clinician and coach, right? So what was the value? What do we break?
Well, it has been a massive transition, right? Because I think in a way you could, being clinical with it, I could hide behind the fact that it didn't feel very nice to tell someone, well, your blood sugar is actually in the pre-diabetic range or whatever, because I'm just stating facts. And it was a bit of maybe a shield for me, because by nature I don't like to upset anyone, right? I don't rock the boat. I'm a little bit too nice. And it was actually in one of our squad sessions when we were using the values discussion, and you asked me, what are your top 3, Mandy? And I was kind of a little bit stuck on it. And then you pointed out kind, and you're like, kind is one of your values. And it didn't initially land with me, but then when I thought about it, I was like, actually, it is a driving value for me. And it's kind of really changed the way I think about things a lot, because I actually spent a whole year after that with this whole kind of kind, not nice was the mantra that I had in the back of my mind. And it shifted how I have these discussions. So you can present the clinical information to someone, but if you don't package it in the right way, or you're not kind of able to talk to the person about what this actually looks like in their life, then it's not going to change them. And if you're too nice with that, you know, someone says, oh, but can I still have orange juice? I really like orange juice with my breakfast. I'm like, you're pre-diabetic. No, you cannot have orange juice with your breakfast. But the old nice version of Mandy would have been like, oh, I just want to let them have it because they want it. But and it's kind of that first order, second order consequence, right? The first order consequence said, oh, you can have it because it feels nice in the moment. But actually that was not me living into my value. That was not me being kind to this individual, because actually that was enabling them to continue with a habit which was ultimately detrimental to them. And so it was this massive shift of understanding this is a value of mine, and I've been working through it in the wrong way. I've mistaken not too nice for what should have been kind, and shifting that allows you to be able to go into some really hard conversations. And I have done that where I've said some things, not that have been, it's never mean, because kind is ultimately the thing, right? But I know this isn't going to feel nice for you right now, but this is the kind thing that I need to tell you. And I've said, and I kind of worded in like, as a coach, I have to say what is truly honest and what is the kindest thing for you in the long term here. And usually that can land for someone a lot better, because they're like, this feels real. And so that was the big shift for me. Was I already knew a couple of my values, but that one was like, oh, that's a subtle shift that actually massively changes how I behave on a daily basis.
Totally. Yeah. And I think this is where, you know, you and I always bring this up with our with our coaches inside Body Reset, where we've got so many things we could talk about, but that selection of what tool do we use when is massive. And I'm sure it is in a lot of industries, but knowing that we're talking about health, it's not just, one area, exercise, nutrition, mindset, how we actually do it on a daily basis, where that is actually how we talk about ourselves during those times, how we continue to either reinforce or deflect those sort of actions on a regular basis. There are so many ways of presenting information and being able to self-iterate and be self-aware enough to be like, was that just felt nice to me because I felt smart, or was it an area that was truly impactful to the individual, right? And I think I came from that space that I would use really big words, and I would talk about all the things that we could do to improve someone's health in ironically kind of the same way, but through that very like specialist lens, but being able to get to a point of, well, what do you think would work here? How achievable does that feel? Do we need to break this down? Do we need to push this harder? Like, give me some feedback on what you're feeling here, right?
Yeah.
So for me, it was similar in regards to, for me, intellect was definitely a value that I held highly. Like, I don't like spending a lot of time around dumb people, like just in the bluntest way possible. You know, like I would very much like, if people are smart, intelligent individuals, like I really enjoy jamming with them, right? But I've also seen what that looks like talking to someone who has a very high IQ but very low EQ, and I find that equally irritating, right? So when I looked at that alignment of values between, was I allowing them to tell me where they're at and how they feel about those things, was in a way that true version of intellect that I was after, which is how aware are they of how that feels to them, what their confidence score, that sort of thing, and making sure that on my side I wasn't just presenting IQ, there was EQ there as well, because the best way is the one they follow, not the one that looks good on paper. So we kind of met in the middle from a similar sense, where it still becomes coaching, it still becomes more collaborative in a nature, but it's through asking better questions and breaking it down that way as well.
Yeah, interesting. I didn't realize that, but
I hadn't talked to you about
No,
that.
you
We just
haven't.
break things down on a call. But in a way, both of us being a lot more conscious of that is something that we are now a lot more confident in our coaching style, because it's kind of, we'll dive into this in many different ways, but we're committed to the outcome, right? Which is, how do we truly help the individual and be the best coach or change maker that we can be? Again, are we consultants? Are we clinicians? Are we coaches? I don't know what word to use anymore, but change maker. And being able to do that through the lens of being flexible and how we get there, I think is also very fun. New episode to come on that one. But you were going to say something?
No, keep
No,
going.
cool. So being able to sort of give yourself that space to really get clear on that sort of self-image, that awareness of what really drives you, and then like we're doing, kind of the benefit of podcasting, because this is just as beneficial for us to be able to communicate that out loud. Like I've just done to you, opened up, exposed on the call around why the intellect piece is so important, and then how that's been developed and become a lot more contextual to me over time, has been super helpful. So let's go back to the kind, not nice. How does that change your decision making on a day-to-day basis outside of in a coaching environment? That does come up as like okay, I get to decide between making me feel good and them feeling good. Can you give me another example of where that shows through?
Yeah, it does on a personal level, because the kind, not nice is also nice in the moment. Might be sit down and have a beer or whatever on a Friday night, because that's what you want to do to wind down. But the kind thing might be, I actually haven't done any movement today or whatever, and I know that I need to go out and train because that's important for my health in the long term. So it can show up in you can filter so many decisions through a single value. I think is the key thing there, and it shows up in a family sense as well. Like with your kids, are you just being nice to them and letting them get away with what they want to get away with, which is everything that's not great for them? Or are you actually having that conversation of, I know you want this right now, but what's actually really good for you is this, and this is why I'm holding this line. Or and I think the other big area, probably the most challenging one for me, in which this has shown up in, is actually around honest communication. Not that I was intentionally dishonest, but in some ways being too nice is dishonest.
Well, it's that classic, like, do you want the right answer or do you want the nice answer?
Yeah. Do you want me to say the thing you want to hear, or do you want me to say the thing that is actually truth? And I think being nice to someone, and especially in a relationship that's important to you, whether it's your partner or your parents or your siblings or whoever, being too nice and not saying what is truthful is ultimately damaging to your relationship with the person, but it's also damaging potentially to their growth and to your own. It's on so many levels. So, and I think that's where it's probably the most challenging, because always you want to, especially if you're not the rock the boat type person, the default setting goes back to just too nice Mandy all the time. And I have to remind myself, what is the kind thing to say in this situation?
Yeah, I like that. And I think this ties into a big discussion we've had around that guilt factor of getting your own workouts in and things like that as well. Because if your value does cover the health and the family fields, you are going to have a conflict of that coming through sometimes between... even we had a really, really good discussion. It's probably come a couple times now, but I feel like it's one of the most crucial ones, between how do you want your kids to talk to yourself if they're starting to themselves, if they're putting on weight, right? If you've got a kid who's going through teenage years, they're starting to put a bit of weight around the middle, you obviously don't want to be like, well, you need to lose weight now, you need to go on a diet, you need to do X, Y, and Z. There's, plenty of us that I'm sure have been through that. And then what's that nuance between your son versus your daughter, right?
Yeah.
And this has been a fascinating chat with some members recently, because I think that's where that alignment of really communicating your value of health then shifts it from, oh, mum's on another diet, to, oh, mum's like her energy's better, like she's really looking after herself. I'm noticing a bit more structure, or whatever that comes through. It depends how aware that kid is of what you're doing. But it's been really, really big, because I think it's, let's talk about this pushback, I guess, on body positivity for a second, because it is an area that we're going too far with it. We did, I think, see an overcorrection at some point,
Yes.
where it was like, be happy at every weight, and like absolutely be happy at every weight, but it's not that you're in a position that it doesn't matter, because what you're doing in that is ignoring it. So that's actually a suppression of how those signals your body's coming through, right? It's like this idea of like, you can't be fundamentally healthy if you're 50% BMI, right? Or body fat percentage. Whereas the other side of that, what's the end goal? Because I definitely know people that are in fantastic physical shape, but their mental health is in the toilet because they're constantly like, I can't have a chippy or I'm going to put on 10 kilos, right? So it's this, for me personally, it's the kind not nice, to be honest, because it is where am I holding the standard for myself and where am I allowing the space? Because both of those require quite an opportunity for how you communicate with yourself. First one being time to keep it in check here. Like you've gone a bit far and you're moving into this sort of very comfort society where you're noticing that there's actually a decreased appreciation for the foods you're eating because you're just hoofing things back, right? Yeah. I love the whole mindfulness concept of putting a piece of chocolate in your mouth and letting it melt and tasting the flavors and just having it sit there, rather than when you're in that moment, you're probably going, there's 2 blocks, here's 5 more, and then flushing it down with Coke or whatever the next thing is, right?
Whatever other people do.
Yeah. Whereas the other side of that as well, if you go out for dinner and you're looking for a way to weigh each part of your meal, so you know exactly what the calorie amount is, and you can't quite relax until you know that you've had X, Y, and Z, or haven't had X, Y, and Z. And I think both of those are unhelpful, right? So again, at the risk of kind of getting stuck in my own conversation here, I think for me that's been a really nice way to think about, one, first order consequence, how is this coming through as the values for my kids? And then second order consequence, how are they talking to themselves by through observing my actions, right? And I think that's something we'll talk about a lot more in future episodes too, between that communication of family and people around you that are watching what you're doing. But I think that alignment of value still comes very much first.
And I think that if we go back to the weight discussion there for a minute, which obviously is not the only consideration here, but it is a good example, you can, again, use a value at whatever your value is. Because like for me, the value is kind, so that you can filter so many ways through that. But what if your value is health, for example, and you don't have kind as a value? You can look at the weight discussion as, okay, so I am happy and, you can be happy at any weight, but is this healthy for you ultimately? Then the answer might be quite different to how you actually respond. Or maybe your value is family, if we take it right back around to that one. And now we're asking the weight question, and we know that statistically if your weight is at over a certain amount of BMI or body fat percentage or whatever marker we're using to measure that, there is a higher risk of certain cardiometabolic risk factors and all of these sorts of things, which means that your life might not be as long. So how's that impacting your value of family and actually being around for them? So you can these big nuggety questions which we have to kind of answer in so many ways, to bring it right back to the start, which is identify your values first, because they become the guiding principles of everything that you do. And it takes so much of the complexity out of it in a way, because you're just filtering it through these. If you go top 3, it's really hard to narrow a big list of values down to your top 3 because everyone wants all of them.
Yes.
But yeah, it can be. It's such a key part, I think, if you're just starting out on a health journey or you're kind of in that place of overwhelm or a bit stuck.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, the more we talk about this, the more I feel like the kind not nice and the intellectual versus emotional intelligence is kind of the same thing, because an example that I get irritated with regularly is the new PT that's being told that calories in, calories out is the only thing that matters, so they just need to do more of that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, intellectually, you've now understood a concept, maybe, or you're spouting what you've heard somewhere else, but emotionally, you've got zero understanding of how people work, right? And I think being able to look at that space of, how am I being able to be factually correct, as you said, but also make sure that this is helpful? And it's going to come through in those. It's going to come through in the arguments. It's going to come through in those sort of moments where potentially your partner or your kids are struggling with a certain body image shift. Right? There's plenty of things kids will say in a very mean way at school that completely shift how you think about things. Your kid comes home the first time and says, "This person's fat," or you say, this person's X, Y, and Z, right? These labels that get thrown out there that kids are hearing and then saying out loud and then having to create a meaning to. And it's very interesting because even technically, if someone is over 30% body fat, by definition, they may be fat, right? But then there's an emotional attachment to that becomes the shame and the things associated with that feeling, right? So in so many different ways, you're going to have those things to tackle, right? That's life. There's going to be plenty of communications where you're like, I thought of it a different way, but wow, that now made me change it. But being able to have those values and guiding principles at home at least allows you to have a North Star in many ways. So look, before we kind of carry on, team, I'd love for you to take a second to have a little think around what are those values coming through for you? Like if it is family, if it is health, if it is growth, or it is presence, or it is integrity, or it's adventure, like all of these. And in some cases that space of presence and growth, they can be very conflicting as well, but it's being able to really give yourself time to think through these. One, what are those values? Give yourself 3. 2 is how do you reinforce those on a regular basis? How do they show up for you? And then 3, as we've just talked about and spent a bit of time on, is how do we think through a problem using those values? So next time you have a personal or a professional conflict or problem to solve, give yourself the extra frame or lens to think through. And does it change your decision-making process? Because I think there's so many decisions that we make in our life that there's an A or a B. But when you ask yourself, what helps me in the longer term, it makes that decision, I think, a little bit easier to make, because you could make that. For example, there's a decision you need to make at work. Both of them end up being profitable, but one of them comes with more peace of mind, right? Obvious choice, right? Or whatever the thing might be. But that's just kind of a nice way to give yourself that process to look through. So we've kind of covered the key process of values and where we see it come through and that decision-making aspect. What are we going to make sure that we reinforce this week? What's the big takeaway for our members at the retreat when we talk about values that potentially, obviously the benefit of us flying all the way to Bali instead of doing this on Zoom is that separation of space. So you talked really quickly around the nature of removing noise in order to know what those actually are, right? And I think podcast in a way is actually a really nice way for you as the listener to separate from the outside world for a little bit, reduce a bit of noise and listen to hopefully people that you find useful in a way that can allow you to reinforce those habits and things that you actually want to do in your own life, right? So where was I going with that? This idea of connecting or disconnecting in order to really give yourself that self-care. What do you do on a regular basis personally to give yourself that space, or even you feel like you're in misalignment of values? What's a personal recommendation or a personal self-check to make sure there's an alignment?
Good question. I think the first part is getting clear on what those are, and then you just kind of practice running your decisions through them, right?
Yep.
And the reality is there's always going to be a pull away from those, potentially. So you're always probably going to need to catch yourself at times. And I think what I would recommend and what I would do for myself is, whether it's once a month, whether it's once a week, as often as you want to do it, just maybe even spend some time, whether it's with a journal or whatever, of just reflecting on, body reset journal, reflecting on how over the last, I think I said this at the start, but how over the last month have the actions that you've taken, how in alignment with those values that are important to you have they been? And then the next question would be, if you were to have that month again, how would you do that differently? And then looking forward, what are you going to change? What's the one thing you're going to change in order to live more in alignment with your specific values in the coming month in relation to those kind of basic daily decisions that you make, whether it's your movement or your food or your sleep or your kids or whatever it is. Because I don't think it's something that we nail immediately, right? It's just something, it's a long-term process, and it's just coming back to it. And maybe the real action step there is just knowing to come back to it. Come back to it and spend some time with it, because it's amazing what your brain does when you actually just sit with something for long enough, right? You tumble it round and it takes different shapes and forms, and then you get these little moments of clarity, and you're like, that's what that is. And then you can kind of work on that. So just spend some time with it and reflect, and then plan forward as well. I think that's the key step, is if you're not actually planning on how you're going to do this more, well, it's just a pipe dream, really.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think that I was going to say, we talk a ton about that removal of noise, going for that walk without additional distractions, being able to audit that when you notice you're getting a bit more fidgety. But I've become more and more of a believer of the writing down of steps and that audit through those simple 2 or 3 questions, right? Like what went well, what could be better, and how am I aligning with values? And just an ability to remind yourself of that on a daily or at least a monthly at minimum or weekly basis can be a really nice way to just keep yourself a check on that and give yourself a bit more time to sit in that, because the world moves really quickly and our ability to get distracted is only going to increase. It's fundamentally part of that human nature to go for that new, novel, exciting thing and kind of get pulled into that next dopamine hit. So being able to slow down, center is a more and more scarce resource, and I think it's in many ways just the center of that alignment, that feeling of just I'm on the right track, or I've got that level of self image that I'm clear what that is. So no, I think it's really clear, and I think as you've kind of highlighted throughout all of this, those interactions and communications with everyone we care about in our life are only going to improve when we have a better sense of self, and if the only way we have that is by giving ourselves time with self. So it kind of comes full loop. But
it does.
yeah, look, I want to finish that one there. I think it was really as a first episode from Bali, being able to dive deeper into the kind of guiding force behind why we do what we do, and then hopefully, guys, giving yourself a bit of time to think about that for yourself personally, because that decision-making framework isn't just going to be a health endeavor that will make multiple areas of your life probably quite nice.
I agree.